I know that most of us, while watching this video, are in a safe place. But have you ever wondered that the part of our lives we spend experiencing things is just a tiny dot, extremely small, compared to the vastness of the world? This means that, beyond the safety we are fortunate enough to enjoy, there are environments far more harsh outside. Humans, in reality, have the ability to adapt and survive in various natural environments and conditions. This is absolutely true. However, when we leave our safe zones, how far does this adaptability go? Have you ever imagined what some of the most terrifying and extreme places on Earth might look like? It could be a freezing, inhospitable place, ready to suffocate anyone daring enough to conquer it. A place known as the largest death zone on the planet, or an island harboring dangerous pathogens, capable of killing anyone who dares come too close. I don't know what you would call such places, but perhaps the most fitting terms are death zone or dead land. With places like these, it's best to never, under any circumstances, should you think about approaching these places if you want to keep your precious life. What are these places like? Why are they so terrifying? And with human capabilities, can we conquer these death zones? All your questions will be answered on this journey to explore the deadlands that you should never step foot in. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel to help the grow stronger. Without making you wait any longer, let the video begin. First, it must be said that the death zones we'll be exploring in today's video are real places on Earth. These are lands that were once inhabited, or still have a very few residents today. What makes these places dangerous and earn the name Deadlands can be split into two categories. One caused by harsh and lethal natural conditions, and the other due to human mistakes that have made the land unable to sustain any form of life. And I believe after visiting these places, you will surely feel that you are living in an extremely safe environment. First, take a look at these images. Do they look familiar to you? Yes, we are at Mount Everest, the rooftop of the world. At 11:30 a.m. on May 29, 1953, two climbers, Edmund Hillary from New Zealand and Tenzing Norgay from Nepal, successfully reached the summit of the highest mountain on Earth for the first time. Together, they created an unforgettable moment in world history as the first people to conquer Mount Everest. After years of dreaming about conquering the 8,848-meter peak and surviving 7 grueling weeks in the freezing Himalayas, they had exhausted their strength. These two small individuals achieved what seemed impossible, carrying backpacks weighing 30 kilograms and constantly breathing the thin, bone-chilling air with temperatures dropping to -1 degree Celsius. Yet both Hillary and Norgay took the time to savor those magnificent moments when standing atop the world's highest peak, gazing in awe at the view and feeling the triumph of their success. They gave their lives to send a powerful message. No matter how harsh nature is, humanity's smallness can still conquer it. The only souvenirs they left on the summit of Everest were a chocolate bar and a crucifix. These symbols of faith and life were left in hopes that brave souls would continue their legacy, reaching the summit of the snow-covered mountain for generations to come. However, behind those glowing moments of glory, perhaps the two climbers could not have foreseen that the beautiful place they had just conquered would later become the final resting place for countless explorers. After that historic moment, people flocked to conquer the rooftop of the world. But soon they realized a harsh truth. Everest is truly terrifying. It's far scarier than you could ever imagine. Everest has witnessed countless generations of mountaineers and explorers from all corners of the globe. They carried an unquenchable passion, wanting to challenge themselves at the highest limit, to touch the pinnacle of the planet, if only for once in their lives. Making their mark in history, unfortunately, many of them would never achieve that goal. By 2016, out of 4,000 climbers attempting to conquer Mount Everest, 280 had permanently left their lives in the icy snow of the Himalayas. This has made Everest the largest natural death zone in the world. Can you imagine what humans have to endure to conquer the rooftop of the world? With such harsh and terrifying natural conditions, it's difficult for an average person to adapt to the weather here, let alone attempt to conquer it. However, if you are someone with exceptional physical endurance and training experience, you might be able to climb up to around 2,500 meters without encountering any major issues. But as you surpass the 2,500 meter mark, symptoms begin to appear as your body slowly becomes overwhelmed. The most common symptoms at this height are nausea, headaches, dizziness, and exhaustion. It doesn't seem too dangerous at first, right? If you can take a rest, perhaps the journey would continue. Continuing to 3,600 meters, your body signals once again that it's feeling unwell. Worse symptoms will emerge, including shortness of breath, coughing up blood, and loss of consciousness. At this altitude, some unfortunate individuals will be eliminated from the race. Those who continue climbing to 5,400 meters will face thin air, where the oxygen level is only 50% of what it is at sea level. If you remain at this altitude for more than 30 minutes, you could die without supplemental oxygen. Finally, at 8,000 meters, you have reached the death zone. The oxygen at this point is only 30% of what it is at sea level. American professional mountaineer David Bryus, who has climbed Everest multiple times, describes the death zone like this. At the death zone, even with an oxygen tank, you feel as if you're running on a treadmill, but only breathing through a straw. So, how can we define it? The death zone is a term used by professional climbers to describe altitudes above 8,000 meters, where oxygen is so scarce that the human body is in a constant battle for survival, minute by minute. At this altitude, oxygen becomes the most luxurious and expensive commodity for the human lungs. An amateur mountaineer reaching this height could lose consciousness or even die within seconds without supplemental oxygen. For professional climbers, they too will quickly be overwhelmed by headaches and begin to lose awareness. Lack of oxygen, combined with temperatures dropping below freezing, will cause vomiting, disorientation, and hallucinations. Death is almost certain if the person doesn't get oxygen and warm up their body within minutes. You would undoubtedly agree that there is no debate about why Everest is called the death zone of the world. If you are an ordinary person, you absolutely should not attempt to conquer it. Neither you nor I would stand any chance of survival in such a place. But humans always have exceptions. We know how to defeat death and conquer nature. The man we see in the image is Reinhold Messner, a true legend of mountaineering. He realized his passion for conquering heights at a very young age, even when he was just a boy. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more exciting videos. At the age when most of his peers only knew how to eat and sleep, Reinhold Messner made his first expedition in the Dolomites of Italy, with landscapes so beautiful that no other place on Earth could compare. By the age of 20, Reinhold Messner and his brother, Günther Messner, had already made their names as two of the most talented mountaineers in Europe. For someone like him, one word can only be used to describe him: genius. The journey from genius to greatness is long, and to be considered truly great, there was one place Reinhold Messner had to conquer. Certainly that place was the death zone of Everest. But before that, Many people had already conquered Everest. So how could he achieve a feat even more remarkable than theirs? The answer was to conquer it without using supplemental oxygen. Reinhold Messner was the first to propose the idea of exploring Everest without the aid of oxygen tanks. And, as we mentioned earlier, this was nearly equivalent to suicide. Despite all the objections from fellow mountaineers and the scientific community's explanations, on May 8th, in 1978, a two-person climbing team, Reinhold Messner and Peter Heller, an Austrian mountaineer, reached the summit of Everest without using supplemental oxygen. Indeed, at that moment, I was no longer myself. Everything became hazy before my eyes, and my mind seemed to go numb as I stood atop the roof of the world. All I could hear were my heavy breaths. We were gasping for the rare oxygen in that incredibly thin air. This is how Reinhold Messner describes his miraculous journey. But for him, it seems that the victory didn't feel as absolute or fulfilling as he had hoped. Climbing Everest without oxygen was already an extraordinary feat in human history. This accomplishment alone would secure Messner's place in the annals of history. However, perhaps he didn't want to share that spot with anyone else. Just 2 years later, on August 20th, 1980, Messner set out to conquer Everest once again. This time, he went alone. The feeling of being all alone, conquering the summit of Everest, was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, he said. I climbed to that peak alone and returning safely alone. While climbing, I slipped and fell into a crack in the night and nearly gave up due to hunger, cold, and fear. Then, the burning desire to conquer Everest on my own pushed me to get back up and continue fighting. When I reached the summit, the feeling of exhilaration was no different from the moment humanity first set foot on the moon. Everest truly is a vast death zone. It has been, is, and will always be like that, forever. But as you can see, this is not the limit of human capabilities. There are still exceptional individuals who conquer the rooftop of the world, who conquer the death zone of Everest. Indeed, despite nature's harshness, humanity can still overcome it. However, there are some death zones that humanity cannot conquer because they are created by human hands. About 1 kilometer off the coast of Scotland to the west lies the small island of Gruinard. Its pristine beauty is now a thing of the past because nearly 7 decades ago, humanity turned it into one of the most dangerous areas on the planet. No humans or animals live there anymore. Currently, the island looks like a wasteland from a post-apocalyptic Hollywood movie. Indeed, anyone who dares to set foot on this place could die painfully. For decades, many have wondered what turned this once beautiful island into a deadly hell. To answer that question, we must go back to the early years of World War II, when the dark secret of the island, known as the Death Island or Island of Death, would be revealed. In 1940, as World War II was reaching its peak, especially after a series of intense air raids by Nazi Germany on Great Britain, everything seemed to be spiraling out of control. The British government at this time was deeply concerned about the possibility of a biological weapon attack by the Germans. When the world had yet to know of nuclear weapons, biological weapons were seen as the most terrifying monster. Faced with this urgent threat, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill called for the development of a corresponding weapon. They needed it to be ready to respond and prevent Nazi Germany in case Hitler launched a dangerous biological weapon attack. The UK quickly initiated research and assessed the feasibility of a biological weapon they codenamed N-bomb. The top military scientists at the Secret Biological Weapon Research Center studied the possibility of attacking the enemy by using anthrax bacteria. The plan of these military minds was to detonate bombs containing anthrax bacteria, allowing the deadly bacteria to spread into the air and carry out its mass killing mission. Do you know how terrifying anthrax bacteria can be? Anthrax bacteria can secrete a protein with extremely potent toxicity, causing rapid death. An adult person only needs to come into contact with a very small amount of anthrax bacteria to potentially die. Anthrax not only kills people, but the area where the bacteria spreads remains contaminated for a long time afterward. It may seem too vague to imagine such a terrifying thing, right? Don't worry, I'll explain it in more detail. Now let's delve deeper into it. Bacillus anthracis, or anthrax bacteria, is an anaerobic, rod-shaped bacterium with a very small size. It was proven by Robert Koch to be capable of causing disease in 1876, when he took a blood sample from an infected cow, isolated the bacteria, and introduced them to laboratory mice. In unfavorable conditions, anthrax bacteria will form spores, or endospores, depending on the terminology. Anthrax spores are highly resilient, capable of surviving for decades, even centuries, in harsh environments, and they have been found on all continents, including the freezing cold of Antarctica. The ability to withstand heat and resistance to disinfectants of anthrax spores is truly remarkable. Under the action of 5% phenol, they survive for up to 40 days without being destroyed. When boiled at 100 degrees Celsius, they survive for 10 to 15 minutes. When autoclaved at 121 degrees Celsius, they can last for 15 minutes, and they can survive for up to 1 hour when dried at 150 degrees Celsius. Particularly, the bacteria often remain in spore form in the soil, where they can persist for decades in this dormant state. Continuing the story of the biological bomb. When the biological bomb using anthrax bacteria was completed, the British government needed to find a remote area to test it. They chose Gruinard Island as the site to research the destructive potential of the AND bomb. The first victims of this deadly biological bomb were 80 sheep. They were secretly transported to the island and silently endured painful deaths caused by anthrax bacteria. A few days after the biological bomb was detonated, the sheep began dying in droves. The entire testing process was filmed by the British military scientists, and it wasn't until 1997 that these terrifying films were revealed to the public. However, that was not all. What's even more terrifying is the contamination caused by the AND bomb. The island became heavily contaminated with deadly pathogens, and no one knew exactly how long it would take to restore the safety levels needed for humans and animals to live there. The island was officially turned into a true wasteland of death by humans. Not only did it cause long-lasting, devastating consequences for Gruinard Island, but after all the testing with this deadly biological weapon, anthrax bacteria remained an unpredictable and ongoing threat. The careless and reckless burial of the biological weapons on the island further facilitated the growth of this terrifying biological weapon, silently killing the island. It wasn't until 1981 that the public learned about the horrific truth hidden on Gruinard Island for 39 years in the shadows, revealed when a group calling themselves Dark Harvest sent anthrax-contaminated soil samples to the press as proof. The truth was finally exposed, and the experiments on Gruinard Island were referred to as the first example of environmental terrorism. In 1986, under public pressure, the British government began decontaminating the land on the island by using 280 tons of phenol diluted with seawater and spraying it over the entire surface of the island. A year later, researchers re-examined soil samples on the island, and the disappointing result was that only a small portion of the land was decontaminated, while the rest remained heavily contaminated. After the United States ushered in the era of nuclear weapons in 1945 with the successful testing of the bomb codenamed the Trinity, biological weapons gradually became neglected. Gruinard Island also faded into obscurity, much like the British project involving the anthrax bomb. The British government, over 7 decades have passed since the biological anthrax bomb tests on Gruinard Island, and the island is still under complete isolation. It has become one of the most dangerous areas on Earth due to the resilient anthrax spores that still lie hidden in the soil. All of the British government's efforts to rehabilitate the land on Gruinard Island have failed, because the anthrax spores are almost indestructible, much like the radioactive properties of atomic bombs. And to this day, even though scientists have announced that they have not found anthrax bacteria on the experimental sheep on the island, people still dare not set foot on this island for living or tourism. Gruinard, as a part of the consequences of war, has become one of the most dangerous abandoned areas on Earth, and is a death zone you should never set foot in. You might blame the British for being too cruel, that this deadly biological weapon may be a lesson humanity will never forget. But what you may not know is that such cruelty. The British's actions were not unique. For the Soviet Union, the Gruinard death zone of the British might only be seen as a small experimental area. Indeed, during World War II, the Soviet Union was also a leading country in the development of mass destruction biological weapons. However, in terms of scale and destructiveness, the biological weapons created by the Soviet Union far surpassed those of the British, and therefore, they also left behind a wasteland of death after their projects passed. As early as the 1920s, the Soviet government began searching for a secret location to build a military scientific complex aimed at the invention, production, and testing of biological weapons. Initially, Obika was among the most feasible candidates because it was located in a remote and rugged area, which was ideal for the secrecy required by the project. But soon, it was realized that this idea was foolish. Lake Baikal, the largest freshwater lake in the world, if contaminated by the failure of the project, would present a colossal waste of such a precious resource like water. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more exciting videos. After much consideration, the list of possible locations was narrowed down to 3 areas: the Solovetsky Islands in the White Sea, Gruinard Island on Lake Seliger, and Vozrozhdeniya Island. Ultimately, the chosen location was Vozrozhdeniya, isolated in the Aran Sea, spanning 200 kilometers. Vozrozhdeniya met all the criteria the Soviet leadership wanted, with the most important being its security against the watchful eyes of the West. Vozrozhdeniya had once been a paradise island in Central Asia, surrounded by crystal-clear waters. This small island exuded the simple beauty of a fishing village with hard-working, diligent fishermen. All of those wonderful things later became nothing but memories. In 1948, as the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union entered its 3rd year, the Soviet Union immediately began building a biological weapons experiment on Vozrozhdeniya Island. They tested nearly all types of pathogens dangerous to humans, such as anthrax, smallpox, plague, and Venezuelan equine encephalitis, in order to find the most terrifying weapon. But the story didn't end there. The Soviet Union continued to build a military base located on the island, called AR-7, was established in 1954. From here, the secretive scientists working at this base began conducting experiments to observe the effects of deadly infectious pathogens on animals. Can you guess which animals they would use? Surely many would think that the Soviet scientists would experiment on mice, as they are commonly used in scientific experiments. However, the reality was completely different. The target species they focused on was monkeys. On average, 200 to 300 monkeys were brought to the island each year. All the monkeys would be caged in large outdoor enclosures, breathing the air filled with bacteria and exposed to the diseases in a completely controlled manner. After some time, they would be taken to the laboratory, where their blood would be tested, and the process of how the pathogens destroyed their bodies would be monitored. Typically, the experimental monkeys would die in agony within a few weeks. Although the island was isolated in the middle of the sea and most of the population had been evacuated to other places to live, Vozrozhdeniya remained populated as it housed, by this time, 1,500 people secretly lived and worked on the island. They included scientists, doctors, and military personnel, all selected and sent by the Soviet government. Without a name on the map and entirely conducted in secrecy, the Soviet Union felt somewhat secure about its deadly biological weapon development projects. However, 14 years after the first laboratory was built and became operational, the dark secrets of the Cold War that the Soviet Union tried to hide were exposed. In 1962, suspecting unusual activities in the Central Asian seas, the CIA used satellites to capture a series of images of Vozrozhdeniya. In addition to the images of the fishing village, they discovered research buildings, an outdoor weapons testing site, and a small animal facility. The CIA was careful enough not to overlook any detail in their satellite images. In the context of the ongoing arms race between the two superpowers, any movement of the opposing side that was detected became a target for the other. This was inevitable. The Americans immediately suspected a secret weapons project that the Soviet Union was quietly conducting. The U.S. Navy, Air Force, and CIA coordinated to investigate. A detailed report, full of information and images about Vozrozhdeniya Island, was meticulously compiled by the CIA. After analyzing factors such as the land, surrounding seawater, airspace above, the fishing village, weapons testing site, and animal facility, the CIA suspected that the Soviet Union was secretly using chemical agents or biological weapons for warfare. They were correct in suspecting that the Soviet Union was testing biological weapons on a remote island in Central Asia, but what the Americans didn't realize was that the biological components the Soviets were experimenting with were deadly pathogens capable of causing widespread human destruction. And perhaps the Soviets never anticipated that before they succeeded in perfecting and using their weapons of mass destruction on any enemy. They themselves would become the victims of the very monster they had created. The shocking failure of this biological weapons project was revealed through a report by Professor Piot. The contents of the report are as follows. On July 30th, 1971, a report was made to Bugas about an unusual death at AR-7. At the same time, the base was preparing to conduct a trial with the strongest smallpox pathogen sample in its 23 years of operation. About 400 grams of smallpox pathogens were released into the environment. Shortly afterward, a young scientist working on the island suddenly fell ill after her research vessel approached the laboratory at an unauthorized distance. Her boat approached the testing area 15 kilometers away, while the required distance was 40 kilometers. Although a vaccine was quickly found due to the potency of the pathogen, the scientist could not escape exposure. Fortunately, death spared her, but she inadvertently infected 9 other people, including children, in the residential area. The result was the death of 3 people, 1 woman and 2 children. Realizing the danger of the pathogen, the military immediately quarantined Vozrozhdeniya Island, preventing the risk of contamination nationwide. Two weeks after the incident, the people on the island were immediately vaccinated against smallpox. All roads were blocked, and vehicles going to and from the island were under strict control more than ever. These measures were taken to prevent Moscow from the unpredictable risk of contamination later on. Ken Alib, an official working for the Soviet biological weapons program, later revealed that the Soviet government deliberately selected a special strain of smallpox pathogen. This pathogen was extremely potent and highly contagious, chosen to be tested before being officially used as a biological weapon. The price had to be paid immediately. Due to the ambitions of the officials for a type of weapon of mass destruction that was low cost yet highly lethal, many lives were lost. And the bad news didn't stop there. 1 year after the smallpox incident, the bodies of 2 fishermen who had been reported missing from their fishing boat were found. Many suspected they had been infected with the disease and had not been treated. Following this, a large number of fish in the surrounding waters also died, and no one understood why. Around 17 years later, 50,000 antelopes suddenly died in mass within just 1 hour. Personally, I believe this information is somewhat lacking in accuracy, as there is no disease on Earth capable of killing living creatures on such a large scale in just an hour. Moreover, the number of 50,000 antelopes is truly immense. If the antelopes died, other animals would likely share the same fate. It's likely that the information provided was just an exaggeration about the deadly weapon that the Soviet Union had researched. By the 1990s, the secrets and deadly dangers of the island began to be revealed by those who escaped from Vozrozhdeniya, including Ken Alibek. When the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, the idea of a destructive weapon gradually lost its significance in the context of the ongoing war. The real-world conditions no longer applied, and with strong public opposition, the Soviet government was forced to officially shut down AR-7 in November 1991. All individuals living on the island were evacuated within 2 weeks. And all civil and military infrastructure. The entire area has been abandoned, turning it into a ghost town. And now, there is a bigger question to address. How were the containers containing dangerous biological pathogens handled when AR-7 was shut down? Unfortunately, these containers containing infectious pathogens were not stored or disposed of properly, and for many decades, they leaked into the environment. Just with the anthrax spores alone, around 200 tons of contaminated sludge mixed with bleach was hastily buried in deep pits on Vozrozhdeniya Island. And surely, you still remember how terrifying the survival power of anthrax spores is. After more than 40 years of experimenting with deadly biological pathogens, combined with the careless handling of the aftermath, the entire Vozrozhdeniya Island was contaminated. This is why it has become one of the most dangerous places on the planet, a death zone you should never approach. There are many other dangerous places in the world that we may not yet know about. Even in a planet like Earth, where we take pride in the abundance of life, there are such deadly death zones. Under human dominance, could it be that these death zones will keep multiplying and we will have to search endlessly for a rare place where we can survive? Please leave your thoughts and discussions in the comments section of this video.